Our next session is about weathering the storm, building trust and positivity in these challenging times. And to talk all about it, please welcome leadership guru and former EA and Criterion boss, Steve Cuss.
Back in 1999, I was still in my 20s, believe it or not, but I'd been the director and co-owner of a development studio in London called Intelligent Games for 6 years. One Friday night, after all our team had left, I found myself in a room with my fellow directors, and we had a very big decision to make. Should we deliver the master build of a game we'd worked on to the publisher who'd paid for it? We used to burn them onto CDs in those days, which is why I've got that image up there. Now, throughout development, that particular publisher had been a bad payer. Many times we'd had to wait long after the contracted term for the money to arrive for the work we'd done. Now, sadly, that wasn't particularly unusual at the time in that environment. But we were putting it together as directors with other red flags we were seeing in this particular publisher's behavior. So we had to decide whether to deliver this build or to hold them to ransom, to let them know that they had to make the final payment or we wouldn't send the final build. And it was a large payment, which was common at the time to have that sort of balloon payment at the end of contracts. And if they didn't pay us pretty soon, we would need it to make payroll. And if we couldn't make payroll from their money, we'd have to find it out of our own back pockets in some way. So that was a difficult decision. Now, we had no HR partner in that room. We'd only barely started thinking about the idea of someone being qualified in HR in our studio at that time. But if you'd been there as our HR partner, what advice would you have given us? Now, I tell you that story because it's really a question of trust. And trust is a critical commodity for running game studios, I would argue, or any organization, in my personal opinion. And it can be in short supply, especially in challenging times. Now, I will tell you later what we decided, but here's a question for you. How much do you think your people trust your leaders? And as you reflect on that, how are you working that out? What measure might you use for how trusted your leaders are by your people? How do you measure trust inside your organization? Now, when I'm coaching and training or mentoring leaders, I often ask this question, tell me, and ask usually for a percentage answer. And when I ask this question, I ask, how much do the people you lead trust you as a leader? And they say, I reckon about 75% of them trust me. I go, well, that's interesting. So how much do you think the people trust the organization, this studio here? And they say, oh, no, that's lower. You know, that's probably around 50, 60%. And those are interesting numbers, and they might be true. I guess it's easier to trust a person than it is to trust an organization. And if I ask you if you trust an organization, you probably have to translate it into the people who run that organization to believe whether you trust them or not. And those numbers, like I said, they might be right, but there's evidence that they're kind of optimistic. So this was a study done by Gartner last year that found only 36% of employees reported high trust in their organizations, with on-site workers reporting the least trust. Now, I thought it was really interesting in the first session we saw today to see in data that difference between what people want out of the return to work and the hybrid setup and what businesses want, and they're different. And I wonder if that on-site workers reporting the least trust is an artifact of people feeling forced back into the workplace. In any case, I think that 36% is low. And maybe we're not immune as an industry from that. Maybe we have a trust deficit right now. So if we do, what can we do as leaders and people who work with the leaders of game development studios do about it? Now, building trust sounds actually really easy, I think, or at least it's something it's really easy to agree on if we're at our next leadership meeting and we propose to the leadership team, hey, I think we should take some deliberate and intentional action to build trust. I feel pretty confident that the leaders of that studio will say, yeah, that's a good thing. Let's do that. And maybe some people will even think it's a given that the people within the organization already trust that organization. And that's when you might want to hit them with that previous data. Because actually, I think it's something that in practice is really, really hard to deliver. Let me tell you why. Well, first, let me tell you what I think this so-called simple way is to build trust. Well, it's actually a 3-step process. So step 1 is to say what you do, to deliver predictable leadership, to communicate clearly and consistently, to keep your team informed and involved in the running of your business. Step 2 is to do what you say, following through, be reliable and dependable by consistently fulfilling the commitments that you've made to your people. And the third one is to do the right thing. So this is ethical leadership, prioritizing doing the right thing and setting a positive example for your team to follow. So just do that, right? What's the problem? That's easy. We'll just say what we do, we'll do what you say, and we'll do the right thing all the time. That can't be too hard, can it? Well, actually, it's incredibly hard in practice, in the reality of running a business. How do you and your fellow leaders communicate with the team? Are you always clear, consistent, and transparent? Do you follow through on your commitments? Are your actions aligned with your words? And what about these ethical dilemmas? Are we role models for integrity and honesty all the time? Because it's not that easy in the real world, especially when the storms are raging around our business, as there has been over this last 12 to 18 months. Sometimes you're constrained when people want to know about job losses, for example. You might be legally constrained in what you can say, and that diminishes trust. Sometimes people want to ask you a question and you just don't know the answer. Sometimes there's uncertainty. Like, when will we hear back from our potential publisher? Well, I don't know. I want to know as much as you do. It's really important right now. And sometimes there's risk to the business. So what if you found out one of your suppliers in another country had really questionable labor practices, but moving away from them puts your whole project at risk? Could you still do the right thing then, when it might threaten the greater good of the employment of everybody in the studio right now? So how do we communicate in these situations? We heard again this morning that it was really, really important from a data point of view. Well, the first thing is, don't fall into rationalizing about not communicating. When it's uncomfortable to communicate, it's really easy for a leadership team to come up with all kinds of reasons why we don't do it today, we don't do it this week, we don't do it next week. So we've got to fight hard against that. The grapevine has already got the news. It's a fair assumption for you to take. If one person knows, probably everyone knows. Don't assume that because you once said it before, it's sunk in with people. They don't say, well, they already know. They probably don't already know. And remember that managers are in transition themselves. So you can't, as a studio leader, rely on trickle-down communication. So what you've got to do is say what you know, say what you don't know, and commit to a time to give people more information. And this is so hard when you don't know, when what you know is virtually nothing and what you don't know is virtually everything, and it's really important. And you've got to show up as a leader, say at your weekly meeting and say, I don't know what's happening right now. All I know is this, this, and this. And I'm going to show up next week and tell you exactly the same message again. I still don't know this, this, and this, even though that's the most important thing to us as a studio. And as a leader, that's uncomfortable. It's not something you want to do, but it's so important that you do it, that you show up at that appointed time for building trust. Because some companies are absolutely losing their minds and they've forgotten to be human when times have become hard. And when they get it very wrong, people are very, very quick to be public about it. So instead of using clear, direct language when discussing organizational changes, for example, and honestly providing context and rationale for decisions, people speak in euphemisms. We hear companies using terms like, we'll be aligning our workforce to better support our strategy. We'll be doing a strategic resource assessment. We're going to be reallocating our resources. Now, everyone knows what that means, so why can't we say it directly? It damages trust when people speak in that way, and they'll be very quick to let everyone else in their connected circle know about it. And this is a highly connected industry that we work in right now. And eroding trust is dangerous because here's the thing. Building trust is a habit. Trust is built through consistent actions over time. So it must be a habit. And trust is built actually in very, very small moments. Brené Brown does an awesome talk on this, where she describes trust building as putting pebbles in a jar. Every time we act in a trustworthy way, we put a pebble in the jar of our relationship with any given person. That jar represents the trust level between our relationship. The problem is that a small untrustworthy act takes a whole handful of those pebbles back out of the jar. And a majorly untrustworthy action, in the opinion of the person, not in our opinion, can smash the whole bottom of that jar and let all the pebbles out. And we've got to go and find a new jar and start putting pebbles in it. We've got to rebuild that relationship from scratch. Charles Feltman said, "Trust is choosing to make something valuable to you vulnerable to the actions of others." What does that mean for ourselves and the leaders that we work with? How can we help them to develop that trust-building habit and embrace the vulnerability that they're going to need to show up in front of their people in that way when it's everything within them is telling them not to do that? And how can we help them make something that is valuable to them, vulnerable to the actions of others? Well, I think the first thing is we have to recognize that leading is really hard. For every leader in a game studio or in any organization, the leader is having to constantly balance between the needs of the business and the needs of the people, between thinking and doing. So our leaders are constantly having to choose between what I call cultivating, strategizing, catalyzing, and optimizing. So one way we can help to create with this is to help create a structured approach, especially to making tough decisions. And a structured approach is more likely to build trust even in tough times. So what does that mean? So for me, that is a values-driven decision-making process. If our values truly are an expression of the behavior that we want, since culture is fundamentally behavior, and they're not just some nouns on a poster, then they can be a compass that guides our action. What they can give is leaders context. I always think if our values are properly expressed, they're what tell us to do when we don't know what to do. They go back and they provide our razor and they provide our direction. We have a choice between A, B, and C. We look for the one that maximizes the expression of our values. That's the simplification when we've got this complex decision to make. Also, having the values expressed that way gives leaders something to reflect on before making decisions, thus making it less likely that those quick judgments that are based on instinct or emotion are avoided. We reflect on the values before we move to action. And the third point is around inclusivity. So including people in that values creation process. Is this the behavior that we value as a group is really, really important. And if people have been properly involved in that process, it ensures that team members are heard and respected when critical decisions are made, even if they're not in the room, because they know that those values expressed in terms of behaviors will be the razor that the studio leaders are using when they're making tough decisions. Especially important when full disclosure is not possible for legal or personal reasons. So that can help for sure, the idea that having a values-driven decision-making metrics. But what about coaching our leaders? Well, I believe there's one core practice for leaders that can be critical to building trust. And that is what I call active patience. Now, that may seem like a contradiction in terms, so let me tell you what I mean by that, because it's so hard to be patient when we're under the utmost pressure. So first of all, patience is much more than waiting. Easy for me to say. Tolstoy in War and Peace said that time and patience are the strongest warriors. So patience isn't just passively waiting, it's actively engaging. It's understanding that progress takes time and setbacks are normal. Patience is proactive, creating space for growth and connection while staying positive. Patience with myself is actually really important. So self-compassion, self-patience is absolutely key to growth. It lets us see that development takes time and avoids or at least minimizes the risk of that self-critic taking up too much of our mental headspace. And also, if we can demonstrate patience with ourselves, we model that personal growth and development is the way to succeed in our organization as leaders. When we're patient with others, we create a supportive environment. We can offer encouragement, support, and guidance without judgment. By fostering patience in our team, we help colleagues succeed, and we build those strong relationships that are key to success in a collaborative environment. Effective communication, I would argue, needs patience. Understanding others' perspectives, articulating our thoughts clearly, and addressing miscommunication and misunderstanding takes time. And that draws heavily on our patience. Patience helps us listen attentively, responding thoughtfully, and tailoring our message to our audience. By being patient in communication, we build stronger relationships that I would argue deliver better results. So patience, I would argue, is a leadership tool. I believe that patient leaders inspire their teams to achieve extraordinary things. So patience isn't complacency. It's providing the support and guidance needed for individuals on teams to learn and grow, and for the collective team to learn and grow together. So back to that room in 1999. What do I wish an HR partner would have done? I would have loved it if someone could have been the voice of our values. I would have loved it if we'd expressed our values clearly as behavior. We hadn't even done that work at that time. But let's say we had. We could have looked at that choice and made a decision on what was going to maximize the values. Is it handing over the disc to the publisher, or is it holding them to ransom? And I would have loved them to remind me about active patience as well, that am I doing everything within my power to do while we're waiting for this payment to arrive, and how do we wish to act while we wait? So if you like, reminding me to be actively patient. Well, we decided to send the build as it went. We wanted players to play the game that our talented developers had made. We wanted them to have a shipped game on their CV. That's super important to developers. And we felt if we didn't send that build, that might not happen. As it turned out, if we had have done that work to express our values really clearly, those two behaviors would have been key to it in there as well. And we would have known that was the right decision to maximize that outcome. So now I guess you're wondering, did they pay us? Well, here's the kicker. From that point of view, it didn't matter what decision we made. It turned out that particular publisher was going bankrupt, and we wouldn't have got the money either way, whether we'd sent it or not. At least with us sending it, it meant that the game went out and players played it, and our developers got their credits. So if you want to know what happened after that in the story, here comes the shameless plug part. Last week, I published my first book, and in there I share a lot of my leadership journey. That particular QR will take you straight to the Amazon page for it. And I talk in there about what I believe the 7 pillars of what I call liberated leadership is, and inspiring trust is right at the heart of that process. I think I've left enough time for some questions. Just? Yeah, 5.
Does anyone have any questions? We'll use the purple one now, if that's okay. Who had questions? Oh, well, great.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. I just had a question about your sort of emphasis on patience and how that any tension there with actually moving at pace. I think there's often decisions need to be made quickly, and how does that balance out when you're trying to be patient at the same time?
So the question is, how can being patient live at the same time as acting with urgency?
I think leaders are often expected to make decisions quickly, and they have to be made quickly sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say a quick decision is not necessarily the same as an urgent decision. So a little bit of patience to gather both yourself, am I sufficiently resourced to make this decision in every sense, in sense of am I resourced with the right information, but also am I resourced in the right emotional and mental state really to make that decision. As a decision made when I'm super angry as a leader could have far-reaching consequences. I might have a different point of view. Also, am I resourced mentally and physically? One of the things we see, or I certainly experience for leaders, is decision fatigue. So we made a rule for no big decisions after 3 o'clock on a Friday. We'll make what we think is a decision, but we'll give ourselves till Monday morning to come back to it. Because, you get tired. You get tired mentally, and I would argue kind of emotionally and spiritually too. So waiting for the right decision, I would argue, is more efficient and productive in the longer term than the urgent, reflexive decision. So a little bit of patience with yourself and others, I would argue, is key. And that's what I mean by active patience as well. If you're just prevaricating, then you need to be honest with yourself about that.
Do we have any more questions? It's good. Getting my steps in.
Get your exercise.
Hi, you talked at the start about trust and sharing information with teams.
Yeah.
However, I mean, my experience has certainly been that quite often you do know, but you can't share.
Yeah.
So how do you have a situation where you kind of bring the teams together to sort of say what's happening, knowing that you can't actually share the information?
Yeah, it's a great point, actually. And at Criterion, this is one of the behavioral values that we iterated quite a bit, because we did have for a while something along the lines of we're open, transparent and honest. And then we had exactly the conversation that you just raised. Well, wait a minute, we're not actually, are we? And the word that we added to it to hold ourselves accountable to was responsibly transparent. And so where does that responsibility come? And how do you decide if you're being responsible or if you're actually just avoiding a really difficult conversation? And the razor I landed on for that is if I share some information with the team that's going to increase their anxiety and they have no agency over the outcome of the uncertain thing, then that isn't responsible for me to share it. So, in fact, in that very studio, the very, very first time I had to do layouts, I asked for feedback afterwards and someone said, oh yeah, it was a bit of a shock. Can you just let us know next time if you're thinking about that? And I went, yeah, that's no problem. I walked out and I thought, God, I'm never doing that. That would be the worst thing I could possibly do. Just so you know, everyone, we might have to lay some people off for a few weeks. We probably won't, but don't worry about it. It's the very definition of irresponsible communication, isn't it? So that's the razor I got to about what I considered responsible. And also telling people sometimes that you do have information that you can't share with them can be part of that too, and why.
Did you want to? I think that was exactly my... Does anyone else have a question? Okay.
what do you mean by agency in the outcome of a decision?
Can I influence it? Do I have actual influence over, if there's a choice of outcomes, do my actions actually influence which one of those are? And in that situation I just identified, there's nothing the individual on the team can do that they wouldn't already be expected to do in their work role. I'm not asking them to make a different decision or to behave differently at work to influence whether there needs to be layoffs or not. I would hope they're already doing everything they can to make us the most productive, quality-focused studio we can be. So just adding to their anxiety burden isn't going to help, because that's what I mean. They don't have agency. They can't influence that. They can't change their behavior or thinking in some way to influence that outcome.
We are out of time. Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
For that.